Hello, welcome to the interview here on France 24. Well, news that Israel's defense minister, Ehud Barak, is quitting politics has injected a perhaps familiar jolt of uncertainty into Israel's political life. Now, the announcement comes just days after a truce halted a week of violence between Israel and Gaza. It also comes just weeks before Israelis head to the polls. Now, my guest today is perhaps anything but surprised. Chuck Freilich is a former deputy national security advisor to the State of Israel. He's currently a senior fellow in the International Security Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He joins me today from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for being on the show. Chuck, I just want to ask you,
Thank you, my pleasure.
You have a new book out, and we could show it for our viewers. It's called Zion's Dilemmas, How Israel Makes National Security Policy. And in it, you basically argue that dysfunction, disarray, a whatever will fly attitude is unfortunately very prevalent in the decision-making processes at the very top. I want, though, to just begin quickly with Ehud Barak, because you also talk about the fact that fragile coalition government seems to be sort of an affliction of Israeli politics and decision-making, and this seems to be a case in point. How significant do you think Barak's departure is? Is it going to play into sort of maybe some of the right-wing and religious parties we right now have sort of in that coalition?
Okay, well, first of all, Israel is a frenetic democracy. That's no secret. We have always had rapid coalition turnover throughout the history of the country. Actually, this current government, the second Netanyahu government, is the one of only two governments in the history of the State of Israel that actually lived out just about its full 4-year term, 45 out of the 48 months. So by Israeli standards, what we've seen here is a period of relative stability. I think that Barak's departure is in many ways unfortunate, because I think he's been a steady, experienced hand on the national tiller, so to speak. He's had a moderating role in a variety of areas, and I think we saw, for example, the way the recent round was handled with Gaza. He set some very clear objectives at the outset. They were very limited objectives. When they were met, Israel was ready for a ceasefire.
Chuck, one of the big points you make in your books, one of the factors perhaps that leads to what you call this pathology in decision-making at the top, is Israel's what you call a very tough external environment. Some people might call it a siege mentality. They're facing constant threats. How much do you think the Gaza conflict, well, obviously it was driven by that, but is it possible for Israel to make sort of rational, coherent decisions when it's faced with these constant threats and it has this sense of being under siege?
Well, I think for all the faults of the Israeli decision-making system, one of the basic characteristics is that it actually is a very, very pragmatic, rational decision-making system. There are one or two exceptions to this where emotion comes into things very significantly, primarily the West Bank or the settlements issue and Jerusalem. But those are, I would say, two unusual cases, whereas the overwhelming majority of Israeli decision-making has been very, very pragmatic, very oriented towards solving problems.
Solving problems, but you do also note that there is a more of an emphasis or an influence, so to speak, of the so-called defense structures in the security-making establishment, the intelligence agencies and the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, as opposed to the civilian structures. And you say that is a notable weakness, a notable flaw.
Yes. Look, Israel lives, as you were saying before, in a very, very, very difficult environment. I don't know of any other country in the modern era which has been at conflict for as long as we have, the 64 years of statehood and beforehand. And I believe that Israel is the only country in the modern era, possibly in history, which believes that it faces a threat of genocide. Many countries have faced a threat to their national security. They've even faced a threat to the existence of the state, but not to the very country. Much of Europe was occupied during World War I. The states, the governmental systems were affected. The countries continued to exist. Israel believes that it faces a threat to its very existence. As a result, clearly, correctly, the defense establishment has gotten very heavy emphasis over the years. It's gotten more than its, so to speak, fair share of national resources, but there were good reasons for that. And one of the problems, though, over the years is that the civilian national security organs, and I'm speaking primarily about the National Security Council and the Foreign Ministry, are not sufficiently strong. Their input into the decision-making process isn't sufficient.
Let me ask you about that, because just for our viewers out there, many people are familiar, say, with the American National Security Council and the way it's structured. Israel, in name, does have a National Security Council, but you suggest that it really doesn't wield nearly enough influence.
That's exactly right, and that's one of the problems. The establishment of the National Security Council, which happened formally in 1999, but it was only really acted in law in 2008. So it's a relatively new institution. But people have been talking about the need for such a body almost since the time that Israel was established. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion was talking about it in the 50s. It finally happened. Now, it's somewhat hard to take something which works quite well in the United States and in some other countries, but mostly in presidential systems, and to, so to speak, transplant this into a parliamentary system, and especially the Israeli parliamentary system of proportional representation, which leads to the high politicization and this frenetic rate of turnover. So I think we're in a process where it will hopefully, let me just add one sentence, it will hopefully lead to an improvement over time. And I think, for example, we saw some improvement in decision-making in the last round in Gaza last week.
I'd like to shift to Iran, because a lot of people are looking at this issue and wondering who is actually calling the shots. How much power does Benjamin Netanyahu have? In title, he's the prime minister. How much would, I don't know what word to use, but is he in thrall to more right-wing forces in his coalition, some of the religious parties that want him to take a very hard line?
No, I don't think that's the case, and I think Netanyahu has been very, very cautious with this whole issue of Iran. On the one hand, he has, and I believe he gets credit for this, he has managed to put the issue in the center of world attention, above and beyond the attention that it would have received in any event. And that, from Israel's point of view, of course, is a major achievement. Now, I don't think he's beholden to anyone. I think he is leading the issue. He is the prime minister. But in the final analysis, in the Israeli system, neither the prime minister nor the defense minister has sole authority when it comes to defense affairs. They, for example, cannot order the IDF into action. For that, they need a cabinet decision.
I understand that, but you do say in your book that there isn't necessarily often, there isn't that deliberative process where you have a whole bunch of options on the table, you talk them through, and you come up with the best policy course possible. You often say that these decisions are taken beforehand and sort of driven through for political reasons.
You're absolutely right, but I believe that here we are talking an exceptional case. With all of the criticism that I've presented of the Israeli system, it's not as if we never make the right decisions or never make them the right way. This is one of those cases where I believe the issue has received extensive treatment at all levels of the national security policy establishment. We've been looking at this issue since the early 90s. I think this is a case where every option has been explored, and it has been explored intensively. And the final decision, if Israel does intend to act, it doesn't intend to act, that will be controversial. Some people will chastise the prime minister if he does act. Others will castigate him if he doesn't act. But that's already a valiant call. I don't think in this case it will be because of a faulty process. Here, I think they will have done what should be done beforehand.
What about the U.S. role? How much influence in this current administration, in your opinion? I know you've been out of the Deputy National Security Advising role since 2005, but how much influence does the U.S. have when it weighs in on what Israel should or should not do with Iran?
Well, I think the United States has a huge influence on Israeli policy. As a matter of fact, it's usually the American position is usually pretty much the first consideration in any discussion in Israel, whether it's in the defense establishment or the foreign policy establishment. So the U.S. has a great deal of effect. And there is a very intensive dialogue, there has been for years now, between the two countries in a whole variety of issues, but none like on the Iranian one.
When Netanyahu now famously held up that chart at the UN when he gave his address showing that the Iranian bomb and the time until they reach full enrichment, who decided to do that? Was that Netanyahu being spontaneous, saying, I want to show this chart? Was that a cabinet decision?
Oh, no. I mean, what exactly he's going to say and how he's going to present it is his own decision. And I believe he has always been particularly good at marketing. At least he believes that his approach has worked for him. That was his own decision.
With the Arab,
and it certainly got international attention.
Yeah, in the little time we have left, we're facing a very radically different equation now in the Middle East. The Arab Spring has sort of shuffled the deck. How much you say that Israel's facing a tougher, perhaps, external environment? How much more unpredictable do you think things are right now?
Look, I think we are facing a dramatically new Middle East. There is the possibility that the entire map of the region will change in the next couple of years. We've already seen in a number of countries changes in the regime. We are now facing the possibility that countries will no longer exist in their current borders. Syria is imploding in a civil war, which may result in its fragmentation as a country. We've already seen some spill over into Lebanon. Lebanon has had a couple of civil wars in the past, could have another one. Its existence as a state has never been ensured. We've seen significant unrest lately in Jordan. The future of Jordan, both the regime and the borders of the country, are not sure. I believe that change is coming to Saudi Arabia. Iraq is in a situation of unrest, of ongoing instability. We see instability, of course, in Egypt, great instability, and in all of North Africa, Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen. So the entire region is facing change. And many things that we knew about the Middle East, that were truisms about the Middle East for decades, are now all up in the air.
Chuck Freilich, we're going to have to leave it on that unpredictable, up-in-the-air note. I thank you very much for being my guest today. You are a senior fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and author of Zion's Dilemmas. I thank you very much, and I thank all of you, viewers, for watching us here on France 24.